So I want to welcome everybody to my first session, which was a little bit unexpected. Originally, Selvin and Cameron were going to be presenting plain old planning versus the new Groovy enabled planning. And unfortunately, one of them had an emergency come up and they're not able to present today. So I'm so sorry for the last minute change. I do wanted to just give it a shout out to them because they are amazing resources in the community, super knowledgeable. They've got some great information, I'm sure, about some of the content that they were going to talk about. I've posted their blogs, posted their emails, so that you guys could reach out to them and learn from them as well. In the meantime, it was a really important topic. There's a lot of exciting things going on with Planning Cloud today, and then there's some really cool things that are being done with Groovy. And you heard a great session from Jerry and Bill just prior to this, and they alluded to different use cases that they've been using Groovy. So what I did is last night at like 9 o'clock, I emailed some of my interRel colleagues. I'm so fortunate and blessed to work with these amazing people, and they know so much, and they have implemented some really awesome solutions. So I was like, hey, we had a cancellation last minute. What do you guys think about being on a panel? You don't have to present anything. All you have to do is talk. So I'm so excited that most of them were able to and said yes. So I'm like, this is going to be great. So what I'm going to do is I'm very quickly just going to have you guys on the interRel side. If you could go through, let's give me your name, your role, and where are you presenting from today, just so folks can get to know you. And we'll go tentatively, roughly in alphabetical order of your first name. I'm going to make you think. So like if you're somewhere in the beginning of the alphabet, you guys go ahead and jump in.
Or that's too much work. I didn't think there'd be that much work to do. I thought we were talking about Groovy. Anyways, I'm Glenn Lambert. I'm a senior consultant at interRel, and I'm coming to you guys from Dallas, Texas.
I'm Joe Altman. I am in charge of interRel's strategic assessments. I'm also an amateur Groovy enthusiast for the last 9 or 10 years. And I'm dialing in from Atlanta, Georgia.
I'm Josie Manzano-Stetler. I'm the Planning Practice Director at interRel, and I'm zooming in from Austin, Texas.
I'm Kevin Whalen. I'm a senior consultant out here in sunny Phoenix, Arizona. Had a chance to do a couple things with Groovy. I'm really excited about the possibilities that it's creating right now for us.
This is Prasad Joshi. I am the Northeast Region Planning Manager, and I'm dialing in from New Jersey.
I'm Ronnie Tapoya. I'm the Pacific Region Planning Manager. I am zooming in through a rainstorm.
And Josie, Ronnie,
Hawaii.
Ronnie, your connection may be a little bit slow, so I don't know. Maybe try calling in.
I'm going to turn off my video.
Yes. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
I'm Shane Eckert. I'm a lead consultant, and I am zooming in from Washington, Missouri, which is near St. Louis.
Awesome. All right. So today's session, I'm only going to share 2 slides just to set the stage. And then we got several questions I'm going to ask the panel to kind of get them started. And then what I would love to do is audience, you guys, if you all have questions for the group, please post them in the question and answer or in the chat session, and we will try and address this as well. So we want this to be an interactive session. I did want to just set the stage because when Cameron and Selvin put in their title, I loved, and I thought it was really funny and really ironic, plain old Hyperion planning, or plain old planning cloud. Because if you have seen any of the cloud presentations, if you have implemented EPM Cloud or started that process, you know that there's nothing plain about this forecasting solution that we have. There's a ton of features and functions that we can take advantage out of the box that's available for planning, navigation flows, this new simplified user interface. I will not go through this long list of features and functions, but there's a lot of things that we can do, just native features that they have built for us, pre-built in the cloud that we can take advantage of. Now, what's great is that they've also given us this powerful tool called Groovy, which is an additional language, kind of agile, dynamic language that allows us to layer in additional features, functions, tasks, automations. You'll hear about some of those on today. So again, a tool in our tool belt that we have available to us. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And again, so I think there's kind of a view where, you know, gallery view, if you're on Zoom where you can see some of the panels. And Bill, if you guys, I see you're jumped in, I would love for you to join us in this panel if you have anything you want to jump in and contribute. So excited to have you guys here today. It's fun whenever, if you're speaking today, you oftentimes show up as a panelist in some of the other sessions, which is totally fine. It's a very flexible and fun conference, you know, with all of us. So with that, what I would like to start with is, could somebody just take, I gave a super simple example, and I think Joe, I may toss this one to you. Can you explain what exactly is Groovy for the non-technical people on the call that, you know, are familiar with Hyperion planning, Epbcs, you know, but have heard this Groovy thing? What exactly is it?
Yeah, sure. The main thing to know about Groovy is it's really just a general programming language, just like any of the other ones that you may have heard of. You know, C or Basic, Visual Basic, Pascal, Fortran, all of those. Groovy is another one of those, one of the more modern ones. You know, Python and Ruby are ones that have been generating a lot of excitement in recent years. Groovy at its base is simply that, it's a programming language. And when I first got into it years and years ago, it was just because of that. And a couple of specifics about Groovy that make it really relevant to us here is, one, it's designed to be super, super, super compatible with Java. So that means I can leverage all the libraries that have ever been created for Java within any program that I write in Groovy. And it looks very, very much like Java a lot of times, the way that you can write it. And then the other thing to know about it is it has been folded into the EPM Cloud Planning product. So that means I can create a business rule that's not written in the programming language, you know, of Calc scripts and the way that business rules have traditionally been done. I can use this full feature, this complete programming language that's been, you know, included into planning, and I can write a program just like I write, you know, any other program. So anybody that's got experience with writing computer programs within any language, all the same things that you can do with those languages, you can do with Groovy. And then in addition to that, there's some special features that have been provided that you can do very specific planning things using the Groovy language to interact with your data that's within your planning application. And I could go on this for a really, really long time. So I'm going to try and stop right there and hope that's the right level of detail.
Perfect. Perfect. All right, so that sounds exciting about Groovy for me, who, you know, I don't actually know any programming languages. It sounds, you know, a little bit intimidating, a little bit scary. So before we jump into the power of Groovy and you convince me that maybe that's something that I should look into, what are some of the, and I'd like each one of the panel folks, and we can kind of go in that same alphabetical order. What's your favorite out of the box planning feature? You know, that doesn't require any additional complexity, something that I can just use that's been really powerful, or how you've seen it used at customers that you've implemented. So Joe, I think you're first.
I was waiting for Glenn. I think G still comes before J, like it did.
Yeah, I can go. I think we're talking about any out-of-the-box planning feature that that we found useful in the cloud. And the first one that I kind of like, just because it was so painful on premise for me at least, is the ability to migrate your application. And I believe this was brought up in the conference, the session right before ours. Is yeah, LCM was good. It was a good tool. Before that, it was even worse, but the cloud's just a whole another level of how you can take just a clone of your environment, keep your environments up to date, keep prod up to date with test, copy it to a new instance to try that. I've been really impressed with how easy they've made the migration with the cloud. Just right when you enable it, right from day one.
All right, I'll go next. I can tell you a couple of years ago, I probably would have said templates, business rule templates, and the ability to create capability out of like Lego blocks of templates. But over the last couple of years with some new features, I sort of feel like navigation flows are really cool. And then my ability to create a role-based user interface for somebody to walk through their process, just walking through that grid of available forms, combining that with smart pushes to send data around as I'm hitting save. I think it's a really great way to create a user interface that's very end user focused.
So for me, my favorite feature is the same that was 3 years ago, you know, when the cloud was just first coming out, is the currency conversion out of the box feature. I mean, from a consultant who had spent several years doing their own custom development on currency conversion, this was definitely a welcoming feature to see, and it's very, very flexible and robust. I was just so excited to use it.
For me, it would be the integration with strategic modeling before HSF was its own standalone separate thing that you would have to buy separately. Now it's directly incorporated, and it really allows you to take coming from an FP&A kind of a background, to have a strategy designed for your company and be able to integrate that directly with your forecasting and budgeting results, and then really getting a chance to get good targets and really understanding the strategy of the business behind the whole system, and having it completely integrated now instead of going to separate places for that.
Kevin Whalen with the strategic finance answer out of left field. How unexpected.
All right, so if I have to pick, it's a difficult choice because there are so many, you know, interesting features available. But I will give you two of my favorite personal ones. The first one I would go with is dashboards. Especially recently, Oracle released the dashboard 2, which gives a lot of, you know, functionality and visualization to your planning data, which was never available back in the time. So that's definitely is there. And also the second one that I would, you know, I'm sorry, I'm going with two options, but you know,
okay.
Save some for the rest of us, Joseph.
I will try. Next time I will not do that. But the second one is, which is often overlooked, is the valid intersection. It's a very small functionality, but it has immense power. The first being, you know, just to give you, based on the scenario selection, you can limit the number of years and the months and all. Once you have defined those variables, once you have defined those in the valid intersections, you can then suppress the data in all these different data forms to just, you know, on the data form. So whenever a user picks up a scenario, only the valid years are visible on that, which takes away, you know, many clicks the user has to do on the form. Like when they select forecast, then they go to the forecast year, then they go to, if they have to change it to plan, they have to go to the plan year. So that all that thing can be just ignored or eliminated because of the valid intersection. And one more point on the valid intersection is, many times clients will have a reporting plan type, especially with all this different setup. So you have a financials or a, you know, workforce or whatever module you have, and if you want to go with a reporting cube as well, chances are you will have a view or analytic dimension in that to provide the quarter to date, year to date functionality. So if you want to restrict the data or users to not override anything, especially the month to date values in the reporting plan type, you have to either set up security on that, or even, you know, my way of doing that would be to just make it an invalid intersection so that way no one can write the data in it. It's very easy to implement. There is no maintenance at all in it. So although I said dashboard and all, but my first one would be valid intersection. Back to you, Tracy.
hopefully I'm not dragging anymore and the rain stops. But and thank you, Joshi, for giving two, because now I can. I'm gonna approve what Josie said. I love currency conversion. That's one of my favorite pieces. I think another thing that I really like is that from the get-go, they do nightly maintenance. So you don't have to worry about backing up your system. It's automatic. And also from a development standpoint, I really like being able to exclude members on forms and data maps. So data maps are cool anyway, but I really like the excluding, so we don't have to cherry pick what we want. You can just exclude what you don't want. And I think that is huge. And then also scripts, like Joe was talking about templates. I love scripts. I use them all the time and reuse them. And so that's mine.
All right. And I think on mine, my two top ones would be the hybrid capabilities. So being able to have hybrid cubes is absolutely one of my favorites, and it definitely helps with the overall performance of the cubes and the applications. And the second one being predictive planning, and now especially with the auto predict functionality, just being able to run those scenarios and be able to have that as something you can compare to and baseline against when you're developing a plan, I think is really important to have that feature in there.
All right. And then I totally realized I just forgot to introduce myself to anyone on the call. I'm Tracy Mcmullin with interRel Consulting from Houston, Texas. And, you know, picking my out of the box favorite features is really hard, but I'm going to pick one because I know it's going to come up when we start talking about Groovy. I really like the data maps feature and being able to share data across cubes. And then there is a smart push feature that allows us users to then execute those maps on data forms. So we can very quickly, you guys heard in the previous session, and we agree, kind of using reporting cubes, so having users be able to enter in their plans, and then we want to sync that data immediately to a reporting cube, be able to see it. So there is an out-of-the-box feature that allows us to do that, using data maps to define the data sharing capabilities, and then the smart push, when we attach those data maps in the form, allows users to be able to execute those data maps for this specific intersection or specific data set that they're working with. So now we've kind of heard all of the awesomeness, and again, recapping all of the things that we just talked about required no Groovy whatsoever. There was a lot of really awesome, just out of the box features that we can use with planning. So now back to the team. Let's share some of the use cases when you have used Groovy for a particular customer solution or requirement. How did you use Groovy? Why did you have to do it? So, and why don't we go backwards this time?
Uh-oh.
Except, so Shane, we'll start with you.
I don't agree with that.
So I'm probably one that's not as Groovy intense as some folks here. I try to not use it if I can within the applications, only because, you know, there's a little bit of a learning curve with this. So I try to make sure that we have a focused use case for it. And usually it revolves around specific requirements that we have from the client, that maybe we need to run a specific sequence of data pushes and calculations that need to run, and to be able to have that on a scheduled basis. And so those are cases where I've implemented Groovy, been able to string together those processes in a job that we can then schedule and run on a regular basis, or potentially run even from data forms, because we can leverage tools like the runtime prompts and substitution variables inside of those scripts to be able to focus those calculations a bit more, and the processes that need to run.
We're going backwards. Okay. I also agree with Shane that I love my BSO scripting. So I and I'm not as technical as at Groovy. So I'm great at coming up with the ideas. Hey, we need to do this. How am I going to do that? And then I turn it over to Kevin or Joshi or Shane or somebody else, and then they fix it for me, and then I use it for other things. We've had a couple where we have used Groovy. I'm going to say one of our clients, we had to migrate their on-prem to an enterprise license, and they used Groovy on-prem. So we had to convert their CDFs, which we didn't have in the cloud. We had to convert that to Groovy. That was where we started, really, is so if you have a CDF like an MDX copy and, you know, the Groovy code that you can do on-prem, you can do it in the cloud. So that's where we really started. And then it was things like, well, I want to launch a business rule, or I want to launch a data management load rule from within a business rule instead of having it run as a job. Those are some of the other things that we've done. But I'm going to let others talk more. But I can tell you that a lot of it was being able to take the on-prem Groovy and put it in the cloud.
All right, I think I'm next now. There are a few things that I have done Groovy, but again, that was because the requirements needed that. One specific example, if I have to quote, I had a client where we had to create 3 different applications. So there were 3 different parts. One of them was daily, second one was weekly, and then third one was monthly. So monthly was where all the thing came together from the daily revenue versus weekly operational. And then finally, everything was built into the monthly financial planning model. So as users or planners would complete their processes, there was a need to push the data across different parts. And that's where I had used Groovy along with REST API to push those, numbers, data, financials from those 2 different parts into the reporting part. So that's my use case for it.
All right, I think that's me next. I would say integrating with strategic modeling, but I know Joe would kind of come back at me saying I'm too strategic modeling focused. So I've come up with a use case that we had at a client. We were using a hybrid cube, which Shane had mentioned earlier. It's a really nice way that you're not having to run consolidations or aggregations. And we would take upper level members, and Groovy could recognize those upper level members and then copy those into a level 0 member so we can do other things with it. So being able to manipulate and deal with things that are higher levels based on aggregations, and Groovy just picked that up right away and made that really nice to do.
Okay, so I think I'm next. So there are some cases where you can't use data maps to move the data between cubes. Like for instance, if your source is from a ASO cube, you can't use data maps. And also if you are pushing to another business process, such as PCM, you can't use data maps either. So you would have to use data management to actually perform those pushes. And in order to have a user trigger that, say, seamlessly within the business world without asking an administrator to launch a data management job, or even a power user, and they still have to go into the console and trigger it. I would use REST API inside of Groovy to call the data map job from inside of a business role. So I'm able to actually push planning data to, say, PCM, and actually from PCM back into planning using REST API.
Yeah, so that's really cool. Both Joshi and Josie touched on REST API, and I'd love to talk about that. And I just want to expand on that 1 second, is that we can consume resources from anywhere on the internet through REST API. Or other types of connection calls within planning. So that opens up the world to an awful lot of possibilities there that we don't have time to get into. But I will talk about a certain kind of optimization that you can do, processing forms through Groovy rather than just handing them off to a business rule. What we can do when we submit a form with the Save button is with the Groovy code, we can walk through that form and identify only the cells that have changed since that form was brought up on the screen. So I can define specifically for the cost center, the account, or whatever it may be, only the ones that I have to work on, and I get a little list of those, and then I can use the Groovy code to manipulate the data only where it's necessary. It could be a very, very large form. It could take a very, very long time if we're trying to run it through Calc script language. But if we use Groovy to do the data processing, we can focus very closely, very finely on what exactly needs to be done, and then not worry about all the places where nothing changed, and so nothing has to be done.
Dang it, Joe.
Oh man, did I take it?
We got through everybody, and I was so excited. Nobody got mine, and you went off on REST API, so I thought I was golden.
You could take lookup tables. I was trying to decide between the two.
No, but really, I'll just kind of back up what Joe said. A lot of people kind of focused on like the cool business need requirement of Groovy, but the game changer for me is when I found that you could do that in forms, where you could input data into a form and you could have your calculations and your data pushes only look at what was changed. And I look around this panel, and I'm not ashamed to admit I'm the novice here. It's not very hard to write the Groovy script to look for what has been changed, what cells have been modified in the form, and just process onto those. You're really dynamically fixing your calculations based on only that information that's changed, which in my opinion is just a huge game changer, because you can take a form where you're calculating every cell on that form, and it was taking, a minute or so. And if you just focus on what the user has actually changed, that can dramatically impact the results into a calculation that would have taken a minute to go through all the cells, now taking mere seconds to get that data, get the results, and also see it in a reporting ASOQ.
Right. Sorry, before we move on to the next question, can I interject one more thing really quick that I'd love?
Yes.
So something else that we've had to do now as I listen to everybody talk, another thing that we had to do is, to Josie's point about being able to call a data management rule from within a Groovy rule using the REST API, is that if you run a data management rule, you can use a substitution variable to reference something, right? Like what scenario or what year or whatever, but you can't use a runtime prompt. And I found the same thing when I used the Groovy clear ASO region, is that I could use a substitution variable, but not a runtime prompt. So what we had done, and Kevin was part of this, and then I took his code and I used it again, because that's what I do, is we had turned a runtime prompt into a substitution variable that would run just for that data management job. And then I took that and I turned a runtime prompt into a substitution variable that ran just for my ASO clear. So that was something else that within the business rule, you can take a runtime prompt, create a substitution variable, launch the data management using that substitution variable, which makes it even more versatile, or even within like your ASO clear, anything else where you can use a substitution variable and not a runtime prompt. That's what I wanted to add.
Awesome. All right, so these sound like very compelling use cases and examples, and I definitely want to second Josie's example of now that they've released Oracle APM Enterprise, PCM just comes with the subscription along with FCC with planning. We can really take advantage of the PCM allocation engine to do our allocations, but then we want to have ways to share data that needs to be allocated, source drivers that we're going to use for allocations, and then be able to share that back. And so I think Groovy kind of wrapping that around so that you don't have to have an administrator run it. You can have users kick off those processes, empower users run those processes as needed. So I second Josie's use case for that. So now, okay, so Groovy sounds interesting. I think we're somewhat interested. So now I have a question for you guys. to help understand, the learning curve and how can we, figure out and implement this Groovy. First, my question to you is raise your hand if you come from like a finance, accounting, business user background. And then Ronnie, are you raising your hand? Because I know your camera's off.
I am not. I do not come from the background.
So we have 3 of our panels. Oh, and then I'll raise my hand for that. I'm definitely more of a finance accounting person than I am. Okay, so then the IT folks, if you come from more of an IT background, raise your hand.
Raising hand.
Kind of both, right? So,
Kind of both. Okay.
yeah.
So,
I want to know where Joshi comes from. He didn't raise his hand either time.
Yes, that's thank you, Joe, for pointing that out, because I come from neither. I actually, completed my master's in mechanical, so I had nothing to do with IT or finance. But I was always fascinated by technology, and that's something that I picked up over the course of time. And I like to learn, as we all do. So that's how I got it, introduced into this.
So I think we're kind of a split panel as far as coming from like, non-IT side versus IT side, and just pointing out that we have several non-IT, more finance, accounting, business folks that have been able to implement and use Groovy. So what I'd like to ask you guys is, how did you guys learn? What would you recommend for folks out there that have kind of heard some of these use cases, compelling, all right, we could add in some kind of nice bells and whistles from a user standpoint, from an integration standpoint, or custom validation standpoint. Who would like to share? And I'll kind of just open it up to the panel. What's the best way for folks to learn and get their feet wet?
I can answer for me and Ronnie. We cheat and just copy what others have done,
Yes.
and then get some
Yes.
good credit for it.
That's right. And I think that the key for a non-Groovy programmer to understand Groovy is to understand how to read the Groovy docs.
Mm-hmm.
Because once I understood how to read the Groovy docs, which in my crazy head means I read from right to left instead of left to right, then I could find what I needed. But when I Google things and Kevin Googles things, he asks the questions, and he'll be like, oh, this is how we do it. And I'm like, what did you ask Google to get that answer? So I think asking the right questions and learning how to read the Groovy docs. And I also have to give a big shout out to Oracle's Groovy docs, because they have a lot of really good examples. Oh my gosh.
Okay.
So many good examples.
Can you talk about that, and how do folks find that? Where's that resource for them?
The Groovy docs, I get it from the homepage. If you go to the Academy, there's a link for Groovy docs. That's where and then I bookmarked it, because they update it constantly as they add new methods and classes and examples. So I have it bookmarked.
What I would recommend is, again, I had no background, and especially people who have background in Java, they will have a very easy learning curve with Groovy, because again, it's syntax compatible and all. But in my case, I didn't know Groovy or Java. So, what I started doing is basically take baby steps of learning, Groovy. So just to give you an example, if I want to use a runtime prompt in a business tool, I would just focus on how the syntax is for runtime prompt, and then try to play around with it. If you're learning Groovy, your best friend is going to be print, statement, because with the print statement, you can know actually what the code is doing, because that's how it's communicated. It communicates back and forth with you through the print line. So don't hesitate to use that. Anything that you have, just whatever you want to research, use that print statement multiple times to see how it produces, and then take small pieces and then keep adding onto it. And as Ronnie said, there is a good amount of examples by Oracle. There are a lot of I learned a lot from those docs. So that's a good place to go and study as well. And then also I will give the credit to Joe as well, who got me started on this path. So he has always been a good mentor to me on the Groovy side. So he that's how I learned, and this is his approach that he told me, take baby steps. So that's what I would like to share.
That's right, and that's one of the things that that I try to teach everybody. I'm trying to bring along in using Groovy is what Josie's referring to is whenever you issue a print statement inside your Groovy business rule, it's going to show up in the log for that job. So you run it, and then you can go over to the job console and you can pull up the job that you just ran, and you can look in the log there for any print statement that you created. So if you're not sure whether I've got the right number calculated, you know in your head what it's supposed to be, you can issue a print statement within your program and go over and look in the job log and just see if so far, I'm on the right track for doing my calculations. But I want to level set a little bit on everybody who's on the call. It's like, can I learn Groovy? How hard is it? If you saw me get up out of my chair a second ago, it was because I went to get this. This is one of my Groovy books. This is about the entire language and how it works. So it is a very deep and complex subject. And there's going to be at least two kinds of folks out there that are using Groovy within planning. There'll be people who are taking examples like you can find in the Oracle documentation, taking things that have been done before. Maybe an implementation partner wrote something and you want to modify that or riff off of that. And so there's a lot of capability to take what people have done before in examples or other rules and modify it and slowly get more acclimated to how it works and learn a few things and do a few new creative things. If you're not a person who has ever programmed before, then you're going to target that type of capability. I believe you should be able to learn templates and ideas and code snippets and combine them in different ways and get a feel for what's going on. And don't beat yourself up if you're not a guru about that. But if you're even a finance person, if you're one of these people that's really, really good with Excel macros and you just do crazy stuff, Visual Basic for applications and things behind the scenes in these tools, this is very similar. It's a programming language like that. Or, if you just took to all your programming language courses that you barely use anymore, but you were good at it back in the day, any of that, you have the capability to learn enough Groovy to be creative about how to combine the language features together with the library that Oracle has put together, where you can interact with the planning model. And you could really use this really effectively. But you've got to get out there and read the docs, especially as Ronnie was saying, learn how those Java docs work, because that can be confusing at first. But then once you get it, it really opens up the way all those objects and things interact with one another when you're trying to program. So depending on who you are and what your history are, it's going to depend on how far down this road you can go. I think it's available to everybody, but you just need to level set. What's your own technical background and aptitude? But I've seen a lot of finance people really take to Epbcs and Calc scripts and VBA and stuff like that. So the world of programming, full-blown Groovy is open. It's a much easier language to learn than a lot of others. So, don't be intimidated by the thickness of this book. This is getting super, super down into the details. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with a little bit of knowledge on Groovy, especially the way it loops. And one thing that we haven't touched on at all, which is really cool, I don't want to miss, is you can use only the string manipulation features and looping to generate calc scripts on the fly. If you don't have to have a calc script that's, very, very repetitive and very, very long, you can use Groovy to kind of loop through a list of scenarios, for example, and spit out what that calc script is as a string on the fly. And then you just hand that off to the planning engine and it runs that calc script for you. We didn't even talk about that, but that's a whole cool way. And one of the first ways that we were using Groovy in the get-go is just, generate a calc script, brand new right now. It's exactly what I need to run right now. And I hand it off and it runs, and then I'm back to my business and I don't have to create a whole bunch of different ones in Calc Manager that way.
When I first started coming, into it, it was coming from a finance type of a background, and it was starting with just a specific need and can I get this done, and then working with Joe to help me on it, and learning how to Google it was important because it is Oracle Groovy. It is different. Certain things that would run on a regular Groovy console don't run here because they have the static type checking and they really kind of have it locked down. So really kind of getting a feel for, and it's an object-oriented language, so it's completely different type of style of writing it than the Calc scripting. But getting a little bit better, a little bit more used to the pieces. And then I did go through and take some of the Udemy course. But again, that's for, you know, a Groovy programmer could be somebody that's their whole career. It's a whole separate thing that's not necessarily just here's a piece of what we're using it in Oracle. So it's kind of figuring out which Oracle relevant pieces of how to manipulate an Epbcs cube work with the Groovy pieces, and only kind of focusing and concentrating on those parts.
So for me, basically, I am lucky to be surrounded with a lot of people who actually are using Groovy in our company. And so I leverage a lot of my teammates, and you know, we actually have weekly practice meetings, and we actually share what we our latest, you know, Groovy conquest in these practice meetings. So, you know, so that we have an idea of like what the practice in general is doing and what capabilities are available and who we could actually leverage our code from. But for me, I actually also leverage a lot of bloggers. There's a lot of really great blogs out there dedicated to Groovy. And so I look at those a lot in that, and also, you know, the Oracle documentation. Surprisingly, you know, especially the REST API documentation. There's a lot of examples there on how how you could use REST API with Groovy, and the examples are very, very detailed. And so I was able to, you know, put together my scripts based on those documents.
And 2 blogs just to point out. I know we got Kyle Goodfried is speaking. I can't remember when his session is, but he has another Groovy session at some point during the Hyperion Solutions Conference. So encourage you guys to check that out. And he's got an amazing blog. And then Selvin actually has a great blog as well. So I know those are 2 specifics. And I know if you go to like Glenn Schwartzberg, Opal Olipat, their blogs have links to some of the others as well. So I agree. I think the blogs have been really helpful. All right, so we have a couple of questions that have come through. First question, is Groovy only available in the cloud, or is it available on-premise? Anybody want to take that one?
I can say that I know that there are Groovy CDFs on-premise because we had to convert some, but the ones that we converted were specific to copying dynamic parents down to level 0. So, but I would say yes and investigate what you can do on-prem in Groovy, because there are CDFs for it.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that's 2 very different things. The things that basically all the stuff we're talking about, it's cloud only.
Okay.
And from what I understand, there is some configuration on the on-premise to get Groovy to function. So
you can write the old custom designed functions in the Groovy language if you want to, but you're not going to get an interface with the planning object model or be able to set it, you know, a smart push, kick off a smart push or stuff like that.
Well, yeah, those are cloud only. Yeah. If it's a cloud only feature you're trying to do in Groovy, you have to be in the cloud.
Yeah, and for the most part, Groovy is a cloud only feature, I would say.
What about, we had another person ask, if they don't have an Oracle environment, can they still run Groovy? What do you guys?
You can download a Groovy console. Like it's more of a general. It's not going to be the Oracle Groovy, and it won't interface so much with your Epbcs. But you could learn Groovy from a Groovy console that, you know, you write some code and it spits out the answer at the bottom.
Yeah, hit me up, John, and I can help you with that. I actually know who asked this question. When I first started using Groovy, it was, I think I presented about this at Kscope at 2011. It didn't have anything to do with anything that we're talking about today. It was because it was Java compatible and I could leverage the Java API, and I wanted better than Maxell, and I didn't want to have to use the C API. So this was perfect for me. The Java API is hard to work with, and I didn't want to compile Java code. So I used Groovy code instead. And so there's a lot of stuff that you can do with Groovy. If you learn this and you use it within planning, there's a lot of other areas you can use it as well to just model stuff and try to get the answer to a question. Sometimes I'll have a weird, you know, internet puzzler, and I'll use the Groovy language just to write a really quick thing to walk through and give me the answer. And Tracy, I can't handle the other question that's up there about doing a database refresh from within the application. So the thing about, okay, so there's a question about, can I use Groovy within a business rule to do a database refresh? And I have not learned how to do that yet because the refresh is going to block as long as the business rule is running. So I'm getting competing things there. The business rule is trying to do something and it's not going to complete until the thing is done, but the thing is going to require that the business rule be finished. So I could work out, I could definitely do it by combining an on-prem agent that I could ask to do it, and then it might wait for 10 seconds before it tried to issue the refresh through a REST API, but I haven't found a direct way to ask a business rule to do a database refresh, specifically because the refresh is going to go, I can't do this while a business rule is running. And that's the exact thing that's trying to make the refresh.
Yes.
All right, we're getting close on time, so I have, I think, 2 more questions. Okay, my first question is, what is your customers' reaction been with using Groovy, you know, in their applications, both from a user perspective and from an administrator perspective? So I don't know if anybody just wants to share a few kind of customer reactions.
I will go on that. With my current client, they had like all the business rules written in the traditional BSO, you know, Calc script language. And when I basically told them that we should be able to write Groovy business rules and get few things done in a faster way, they all, and you know, those guys were really excited because they wanted to learn the new technology. Excuse me. So they have a whole team of admins, and out of that, a couple of them are pure, like, you know, more on the business analyst side rather than the system analyst side. But the business analysts were more eager to learn the Groovy language than the, I'm not saying that the admins were not, you know, eager, but I saw more excitement in them. And like I have seen at multiple clients that they want to embrace and learn, you know, Groovy from, you know, so that way they can do things better, automations or scriptings and things like that.
So just a quick comment from me. The first time I was introduced to Groovy, I was a client. So I remember how I felt, and, you know, seeing it for the first time, I kind of thought, well, if we can do everything through business rules and other things, why don't we just do that? But once I saw the actual capabilities, once I understood that we can run, you know, dynamic fixes on business rules on what was changed in the form and just calculate that aspect and then push that. And I was seeing times of business rules going from 1 to 2 minutes to seconds. That's when I was completely on board. And then everything else that everybody else has talked about, the ability to run data management rules straight from a business rule, the ability to string things together, string processes together. All that, in my opinion, was just like benefits, extra benefits. But, you know, once I saw the capability of it and the solutions it could provide, I was on board.
So kind of last question to close it out, do you have to implement Groovy, you know, in today's world? Is it a requirement, or could you deliver a planning solution with the out-of-the-box features?
I mean, you know, Groovy is somewhat new, and there's been planning solutions that have been delivered for years. So obviously you can get along without Groovy. It's more like an additive to it. You can't really replace all the Calc scripting stuff because of the way it interacts with Epbcs and the engine underneath that. You can implement pieces of Calc scripting code within Groovy, as we've kind of talked about before, if you want to do like dynamic fixes based on a runtime prompt or something like that, or just what's on the form that's been edited. But that's still, some of that is still using the Calc script language underneath that. So I'm thinking that you could survive without Groovy, but don't know why you would want to.
No, and I second that, because Groovy is just a, you know, a wrapper or an add-on to all the awesome features that we got. you cannot survive with the other features. Like you need all those dashboards, you need those valid intersection data maps, and I don't want to go through the whole thing again, but that is the core product that what delivers great planning solutions, planning and budgeting solutions. Groovy is something that came later and it's adding more flavor to it, but it's not like you need Groovy is a must. You can design applications without Groovy and they will perform really well as well. We have done that in the past for many of our clients. So if that, that's the conception that many people have, do we really need Groovy to, do I need to learn Groovy to implement Epbcs? Answer is simple, no. You don't need that.
Agreed. I think of Groovy as more like a secret sauce, if I wanted to, if I wanted to get things a little bit faster, a lot more responsive, I wanted to do some, if I needed the capability to like, modify metadata properties, something like that, where a user has to have control over that. I would definitely, that's where I would, resort to Groovy. But in a sense, it's like what Joshi said, it's like a wrapper, and it's a secret sauce to actually get over to some of those requirements that, basically without, with just the components out of the box of traditional business rules, can't quite get over that hump, or it's slower, right? So, it's just a secret sauce.
Yeah, I'll caveat that just a little bit, because a lot of the functionality in the frameworks is done in Groovy. So if you want to tweak that or riff on that, you got to go down into the Groovy. But otherwise, this is trying to, when you get ideas for planning to do stuff that planning can't do, you use Groovy to do that, but planning can do lots and lots of stuff, and you can build a great application straight with that without Groovy. I agree with my colleagues.
All right, with that, we'll go ahead and close out. Because I know we're a little bit over our time and want to see some of the fun intermission slides. And I know we've got really exciting content coming up next from the Oracle folks. So thank you, interRel panel. And again, we hope all is well with Cameron and Selvin. And I'm sorry they couldn't be here today because they're amazing resources, but hopefully this was helpful for you guys. And interRel people, thank you. Thank you. Love working with you guys. All right. Thanks, everybody. Hope you guys have a great day.
Bye.
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 Bye.